As the Dragon Ball franchise continues to evolve, fans are once again caught in a whirlwind of speculation and excitement with the release of Dragon Ball Daima. With its unique art style, return to a younger Goku, and a mysterious new storyline, Daima has reignited conversations about where it fits within the broader Dragon Ball timeline, particularly in relation to Dragon Ball Super. Is Daima a direct continuation, an alternate timeline, or a side story meant to fill in the gaps? Meanwhile, Dragon Ball Super has left fans hanging since the Granolah and Super Hero arcs, with no clear direction for the anime's return. This ongoing uncertainty has sparked debate across the community about the future of the series. Are Super and Daima connected? Which one truly carries the torch for the next chapter of the Dragon Ball legacy? Let's break it all down. This topic in particular is weighed in by original creator Akira Toriyama and the founder of Capsule Corporation Tokyo, Akio Yoku. After the creation of the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie, Toriyama finally weighed in on the canonicity of Dragon Ball Super and everything following the new IP. This information was included in the Dragon Ball Super Hero movie pamphlet. Here he answered various questions about the movie. One of those questions was about what people who already seen the movie should pay attention to on the second watch. Toriyama responds saying that the anime series from 2013 onward has been a casual continuation of his original manga, that being the Dragon Ball Z manga. This statement on its own confirms that Dragon Ball Super is indeed a continuation of Dragon Ball Z, as it's portrayed to be even since the first episode recapping the events of the Buu saga. This has been a very debated topic in the fandom since there was a portion that was very unhappy with Super's addition to the franchise. This is mainly due to certain character changes and obscure portrayals of concepts and overall writing that took place in the show. It feeling far inferior to that of the original Dragon Ball Z series had almost everyone looking at it like a cash cow and something that's not all tied to the main canon. However, that's very clearly not the case, as here the original author himself does in fact confirm that it is indeed a canon placement. Something important to note about this comment from the interview, however, is that Toriyama says it's a casual continuation, but more on that point later. Another important point is that Toriyama says that the year 2013 is when the casual continuation began, which is interesting since Dragon Ball Super didn't actually start until July 5th, 2015. This is clarified though in the second note mentioned in this interview, where Toriyama says that the anime series began with Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods and continued on with Dragon Ball Z Resurrection F, Dragon Ball Super, and Dragon Ball Super Broly. So 2013 is the starting year because that's when Battle of Gods came out. For those of you who don't know, Battle of Gods was in the works before Toriyama became involved. In the Dragon Ball Z Battle of God official movie guide, there was an interview where Toriyama describes how he came to learn about and become involved with the film. He says, "I think around 2011. It all started when I came to Tokyo, and my first editor, Toriyama-san, suddenly handed me the scenario and said, 'Read this.' At the time, I had no idea what it was, and when I was asked, Toriyama-san said what the scenario was for. I heard for the first time about how it was going to be made into an animated movie. Originally, I was only supposed to check over the scenario, but ended up doing more and more of all this other work. These changes included the revision of Beerus from a lizard that planted the seed of evil in Saiyans into his Egyptian Cornish Rex-inspired design, Super Saiyan God from a bulky and caped hero into the streamlined form, scaling back the overwhelming good versus evil scenario to the one that included camaraderie and friendship, and even specific details such as changing the scenario from Krillin and Eightin's wedding to Bulma's birthday party, as well as swapping the Pilaf gang for what was originally going to be a band of random thieves. From here, various films and story arcs within the Dragon Ball Super branding have been combinations of Toriyama's original ideas and Toriyama scripted by editorial suggestions. Unlike Dragon Ball Z, when Toriyama was at the helm of the story and constructed all of its elements, in the new series he acted more as an editor and advisor of the content that followed. This is more than likely the reason for his use of the word casual earlier. Regardless though, he is admitting the canonicity of Dragon Ball Super and stories that took place afterwards. Now that we cleared the Super talk, it's time to go over Dragon Ball Daima and how these two intertwine with each other. The original story of Dragon Ball Daima is an interesting one. Akio Yoku, president of Capsule Corporation, weighs in on this discussion. He says, "The story goes back about 6 years ago, but when we were making Dragon Ball Super Hero, we started talking about how we wanted to do a new series with a different plot from the movie. We were making the movie, and in order to not burden you, I wanted you to just take a look at it, rather than having you making it full. So I asked you what you thought. As we went along, you became very enthusiastic about it. It was different from the original plan, but after consulting with you, we ended up having you make most of it." Toriyama came up with ideas such as, what kind of place is the Great Demon World? Who are the new characters? And the worldview of Daima was solidified. This was the reason for all the promotion about this being the most Toriyama-influenced project since the debut of the original manga. Unlike Dragon Ball Super, Battle of Gods, or anything that came after Dragon Ball's resurgence, had some bit of influence from Toriyama, but nowhere near as much as Daima. So much so that it's clearly a very different vibe vibe watching it from other productions. In another interview during the airing of the final episodes, Akio continues. He says it's true that the author himself is in charge of the story. It is a continuation and it is connected to the Majin Buu saga. That is the fact, and that's all there is to it. There are many parts when you can feel the connection in Daima. The origins of the Kaioshin, the Namekians, Majin Buu, and others are revealed. Every time a connection is revealed, there are some surprising parts. Now, there's quite a bit to discuss here, so let's break it all down. Starting with Akio confirming that Dragon Ball Daima is indeed a continuation and connected to the Majin Buu saga. This is even more apparent when watching the first episode of Daima when events of the Buu saga are reanimated. And if you pay attention close enough, you'll notice that it's done in a way to visually depict events from the original Dragon Ball manga. So with that said, you have two statements made by the head of the people of the series, both calling Daima and Super continuations of the original Dragon Ball Z story. And to be specific, Super and Daima are both stated to be continuations of the original manga rather than the anime, which even further blends the two series together. So what's the real issue then? Well, statements aside, there are a lot of people who bring up what they feel like are inconsistencies within Daima itself that narratively make it hard for these two stories to coexist. Some examples that follow this is the introduction of the new Super Saiyan 4 in Daima, but never making a mention of it in Dragon Ball Super. In fact, there's statements that arguably contradict his assertion in the story completely. Other minor inconsistencies fans have is Vegeta knowing Super Saiyan 3 but not using it against Beerus, alongside the fact that Kibito is shown fused in Dragon Ball Super but not in Dragon Ball Daima. So what about these things? How can Super and Daima be connected when problems like this exist? Well, there is actually an answer to this question. In the same interview about Daima, Akio seemingly explains this very issue. He says, "I'm sure you're wondering where Daima fits into the Dragon Ball series, but I'm trying to show various connections to Dragon Ball. Even if we don't know about it, I think there are connections in the sensei's mind, and I'm not aiming for that. But I'm trying to show that as well." So in a sense, despite the fact that he did mention that Daima takes place after the Buu saga, which chronologically would be right before Super, its placement in the timeline isn't the central point of the story. Instead, he wants to make the show feel like it's Dragon Ball by having various connections to the original series. Even if he himself doesn't fully understand how what's present in Daima may be connected, he believes Toriyama sensei does. As he said though, he's not aiming for it to make sense, and part of that is because Toriyama is at the helm of this project. He further says, "The sensei has a firm grasp on the world of Dragon Ball, and the change is focused depending on the work." That latter portion about him not forcing settings in this project is pretty consistent with what's been said so far, and the setting that's being referred to here is more than likely the placement of Daima and its connection to Super as a result. It seems like instead they're simply just trying to tell a story without the burden of needing for it to make sense to any series outside of the original Dragon Ball Z. And I fully subscribe to this theory. Daima's placement in the story was no coincidence. It's placed right after Buu, but also right before Dragon Ball Super. That way, there wouldn't be any topic about if it contradicts each other or not, at least in the timeline. And by placing it here, there's a lot more room for outlandish things to be done in a story that won't affect the future of Dragon Ball in a serious way. The confusion around Super Saiyan 4 and its place in the Dragon Ball community largely stems from how explosively popular the form became online. It's a big reason why debates over what's considered canon are still ongoing. You've probably heard the claim that Japanese creators don't care much about canon, and it's more of a Western obsession. While there's some truth to that, it's not entirely accurate. Japanese creators do care about establishing a main or central storyline, what we'd call canon, but they're far less concerned with maintaining strict continuity or avoiding contradictions. And this brings us to one of the core issues facing Dragon Ball today: retcons. When Dragon Ball Super was first introduced as the direct continuation of Dragon Ball Z, fans immediately scrutinized it. If Super is supposed to lead into the final chapters of Z, then certainly things need to happen. And just as importantly, certain things can't happen. For instance, Oob must appear at the World Martial Arts Tournament as Buu's reincarnation and Goku's reward for saving the universe. Goku also shouldn't have seen Bulma in the last 4 years as stated in the Z finale. Goten and Trunks are supposed to have been slacking off in their training, and Goku is described as being the strongest by that point, with Vegeta even saying that one day he'll defeat him. However, with the introduction of Super, several elements of that seem to contradict these points. One recent example comes from Toyotaro's manga adaptation, which implies that the main cast is now roughly equal in power. Volume 24 of the Dragon Ball Super manga even features a cover that visually reinforces that idea. And within that volume, chapter 103 specifically, there's a massive group battle that happens and everyone is exhausted, suggesting no one is clearly stronger than the rest. This portrayal directly contrasts with the end of Z, where Goku is still portrayed as the undisputed strongest. Since Super Hero takes place in age 783, just 1 year before the end of Z, there's still time for Goku to reclaim that top spot, but as of right now, there's no solid indication that he has. Also, Vegeta recently beat Goku in a fight on Beerus' planet. So when he says at the end of Z that he will defeat Goku sooner or later, that's also a big change considering he did at one point. While these examples are relatively minor, Super has introduced more significant ones. A major example is the history of Bardock. In the original manga, there's a reference to the Bardock special. Frieza recalls Bardock upon hearing Goku say a name Kakarot. But both Dragon Ball Super and Dragon Ball Daima, despite being billed as continuities of the original manga, clearly base Bardock's character on Dragon Ball Minus instead. This is a major retcon, especially given how drastic Bardock's backstory differs between the two versions. Another key example involves future Trunks. After Cell's defeat, his story was closed with the idea that true peace had returned to his timeline, and that peace would last so long as he was around to protect it. But when his story was revisited in Super, Trunks once again needed help from Goku, Vegeta, and even Zeno to resolve things, directly contradicting the original message. So how does this all tie into Daima and his relationship with Super? Well, it seems that the creators do care about canon, but not about avoiding retcons. Older ideas and concepts often get rewritten or reshaped depending on the current author's creative direction. Sometimes this is to allow new storytelling opportunities that were previously impossible due to old narrative constraints. Other times, it's simply a matter of time passing and the creators wanting to reinterpret past ideas to fit into a new context. Many feel that Super has changed Dragon Ball's tones, themes, and consistency, and they're not wrong, but that doesn't mean that the creators are indifferent to canon. It just means that maintaining internal consistency isn't always their top priority if it gets in the way of the story they want to tell. When it comes to Daima and the new version of Super Saiyan 4, it's clear that the creators do want this to be connected to Super. There are direct references to Universe 7, Goasu, and various subtle nods to Super's continuity. But at the same time, they aren't overly concerned with writing in a way that fits neatly within existing guidelines. If Daima is indeed a continuation of the original manga, just like Super, then that means this new version of Super Saiyan 4 exists within the same continuity. Whether or not that makes logical sense within Super's timeline doesn't seem to be their concern. Admittedly, it's a chaotic approach to storytelling that naturally leads to confusion and fan backlash, and yes, it can definitely be frustrating, but it's important to distinguish between something being a retcon versus being non-canon. Just because a development doesn't logically fit within the established timeline doesn't mean it isn't canon. It could simply be a retcon, or frankly, just sloppy writing. Ultimately, the creators of the story have the final say. If both Daima and Super are said to be canon, then they are, regardless of how much sense it makes. See, I told you probably wouldn't like the answer. So is Daima canon to Super? Yes, but does it make sense? Well, that depends on who you ask.